My mother told our entire family I was garbage and said I wasn't welcome in her home. My aunts, uncles, and cousins just stood there and watched. I never raised my voice, because she had no idea I was already 3 steps ahead. If you want to see exactly what happened 47 days later, when a black stretch limousine rolled to a stop in front of that house, the door swung open and out stepped the last person on earth Linda Caldwell ever expected to see. Stay right here. Hit that subscribe button because this story is going to stay with you. I want to take you back to that Sunday. Not 5 years ago. That Sunday, the one where I drove 4 hours to my Aunt Rolanda's yard because she had personally called me 3 times to make sure I'd come to my cousin Deja's graduation party. 3 calls, from Rolanda herself. So I went. I put gas in my car, I wrapped a gift in silver paper, and I drove 4 hours thinking, okay, this is family, this is fine, I can do this. I was wrong. I pulled into the neighborhood just before noon, and I parked a block down because Linda's driveway was already full. I carried Deja's gift through the side gate, and the moment I stepped into that backyard, I felt it. That specific heaviness. The way conversations dipped just slightly when they saw me. The way certain eyes slid away instead of toward. But Rolanda met me at the gate with a hug that was real and warm, and she said, "Baby, I am so glad you came." And I thought, okay, I can do this. For about 40 minutes, I stood near the drink table. I talked to cousins I liked. I watched kids run through the sprinkler at the edge of the yard. And it was fine. It was almost normal. And then the back door of the house opened and Linda Caldwell walked out carrying a tray of her famous deviled eggs. The ones everyone in this family loses their minds over every single time. And she stopped dead the moment she saw me. I watched the shift happen on her face. Something cold moved behind her eyes. She set the tray down on the folding table. She walked straight toward me. I had not spoken to this woman in 6 months. 6 months of silence that followed the last conversation we'd had, where she told me I was a burden who needed to figure out her own life. And now she was crossing the yard in her floral dress and her gold hoops, and I felt my stomach drop because I absolutely knew, she was not coming to say hello. "Who told you to come here?" she said. Not hello. Not even a polite acknowledgement. Just, "Who told you to come here?" "Aunt Rolanda invited me," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is my house," she said. "Rolanda doesn't run my house." And like someone had hit a mute button, every conversation in that backyard went silent, every single one. I felt 30 pairs of eyes land on us. "Linda," I said quietly, "can we please not do this right now?" "Don't call me Linda," she snapped. "And yes, we can absolutely do this right now. You don't live here. You don't pay bills here. You don't contribute anything to this family, and you had the nerve to show up to my house like nothing happened." "I came for Deja," I said. "Deja doesn't need you here," she said. "Nobody here needs you. You are a leech, Mara. You always have been. You take from people and you give nothing back, and frankly, I am embarrassed that you came from my body." I heard someone gasp. I think it was Rolanda. But nobody said a word. Nobody moved. I stood there holding my paper cup of iced tea while my mother publicly dismantled whatever dignity I had left. And then she looked at Deja's silver-wrapped gift sitting on the picnic table, and she actually laughed. "What is that?" she said. "A gift from you? With what money, Mara? Because you don't have any." "Mom, don't call me that. Don't call me that." I had heard those 4 words before. I heard them when I was 8 and I accidentally broke a serving dish. I heard them when I was 16 and I got a B- in chemistry. I heard them in so many rooms, on so many days, for so many years that they had become the wallpaper of my life. "Get your things," she said. And her voice had gone almost calm now, which was somehow so much worse than the yelling. "Whatever you left in the guest room is in a box by the front door. Take it, and don't come back to this house again." "I haven't stayed here in almost 2 years," I said. "I have nothing in that guest room." "Then there's nothing keeping you here," she said. "You are garbage, Mara. You always have been. Now get out of my house before I call the police." She turned around. She walked back to her deviled eggs, and 30 people stood in that backyard and watched her do it. I put down my paper cup. I picked up Deja's silver gift from the table. I walked to the side gate, let myself out, and I sat in my car in front of that house for exactly 4 minutes. I want you to understand what those 4 minutes felt like. Because this is the part people always skip over when they talk about this kind of hurt. They skip the silence. The 4 minutes where your hands are shaking on the steering wheel and the music in the car sounds like it's coming from underwater and you're just sitting there thinking, did that actually just happen? Did my mother just call me garbage in front of 30 people and then walk away to serve deviled eggs? Yes, she did. Absolutely. Without hesitation, she did. And that was the moment I made the decision. Not a dramatic decision. Not a, I'm going to destroy her decision. More like a clarity decision. A quiet, locked-in, irrevocable clarity. I had information she hadn't accounted for, and I was done waiting to use it. Let me tell you something about my biological father, Thomas Harmon. He was not in my life growing up. Linda made sure of that. She and Thomas had a brief relationship when they were both young, 22, 23 years old, nothing that lasted. And when it ended, Linda made it her personal mission to make sure I never knew him. She told me he was dangerous. She told me he wanted nothing to do with me. She told me 100 variations of 100 different stories, and being a child, I believed her. Because when you're a kid and the one adult who is supposed to protect you tells you something, you believe it. Even when it hollows you out. Even when there is a part of you, somewhere deep and quiet, that knows something is wrong. What I didn't know, what I never knew, not until much, much later, was that Thomas Harmon had been trying to reach me for years. What I didn't know was that Thomas Harmon, by the time he was 45 years old, had built one of the most successful commercial real estate development companies in the Midwest. Harmon Group Properties. 6-state operation. The kind of business that, when I finally sat in a room and actually saw the estate documents, made my entire understanding of my own life shift sideways. And when Thomas died of a sudden heart attack 2.5 years ago, he left behind a will. A will that had my name on it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before I get to any of that, I need to tell you about Brandon. Brandon Caldwell. Linda's son from her second marriage. My half-brother. And the person I am now 100% certain was the architect of the most calculated betrayal in this entire story. Brandon and I had always had what you might call a complicated relationship. He was 3 years younger than me. Growing up, Linda treated him like the sun rose and set on his shoulders while I was the inconvenient reminder of a mistake she'd made at 22. He got the new car at 16. I got a bus pass. He got private school. I got the underfunded public school across town. He got a college fund that Linda contributed to faithfully every month. I got told, and I am not exaggerating here, not even slightly, I got told to figure it out and build character. I built character, all right. Just not the kind she expected. Here is what I did not know about Brandon until everything came apart. I did not know that Brandon had found out about Thomas Harmon's estate before Thomas even died. I don't know how. I don't know who told him or where he heard it, but somehow, Brandon knew that Thomas Harmon had money, significant money, and he knew that Thomas's will named me as his beneficiary. What Brandon did with that information is what I still have trouble wrapping my head around, even now, even knowing how it turned out. For almost 2 years, Brandon had been going to my old apartment address, the one I had given as my contact address when I first reached out to Thomas's estate attorney, and he had been intercepting certified mail addressed to me, legal documents, correspondence from Thomas's estate, for 22 months. Let me tell you how I found out. About 3 weeks before the graduation party, I got a text from my old neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Harris. Evelyn is a 70-year-old retired school teacher who used to slip me oatmeal cookies through the fence when I was 10 years old, and who has, without exception, always been in my corner. The text said, "Mara, honey, I hope you're doing okay. I need to tell you something that has been bothering me for a while. There has been a young man coming to pick up your mail at your old address. The mailman leaves certified packages for you, and this young man signs for them. I thought you should know. Call me." I stared at that message for a very long time. Then I called her. She described the young man. Tall, light-skinned, always in a gray hoodie. There was only one person that description fit. I hung up the phone. I sat down on my apartment floor. And I felt the room tilt slightly, because suddenly, a lot of things started making sense. The silence from Thomas's estate that I had assumed just meant his family didn't want me involved. The certified mail I had never received, which I had told myself must have been misdirected when I moved. The way Linda had said, so casually, so offhandedly, in the one conversation we'd had after Thomas's death. "I don't think he left you anything significant, Mara." She said it like she was reading me the weather forecast. "I don't think he left you anything significant." She knew. She knew exactly what was in that will. She had always known. And she and Brandon had been working together, deliberately, methodically, to make sure I never found out. I did not confront either of them. Not yet. I wrote down Evelyn's number in 3 different places so I wouldn't lose it. And then I went to find a lawyer. That is where the second bombshell dropped. When I located Thomas Harmon's estate attorney, a man named James Whitfield, who had an office in Cleveland and who had, as I would discover, been attempting to reach me through multiple channels for over a year, I walked into his office and told the receptionist who I was. She went to get James. And when he walked into the room and saw me sitting there, I watched his entire face change in a way I will never forget. He stood in the doorway and he looked at me and he said, "Miss Harmon, we have been looking for you for 18 months. Miss Harmon. He called me Miss Harmon, and I thought, oh, this is so much more than I thought. James Whitfield sat down across from me and he opened a thick folder and he said, "Your father was very specific about his wishes. He drafted his will 3 years before his death. He updated it twice. The final version, signed and notarized 14 months before he passed, designates you, Mara Lee Harmon, as the sole primary beneficiary of the Harmon Group Properties estate, including all business holdings, associated accounts, and a private trust he established in your name in 2019. I could not speak. James said, "We attempted to reach you at your last known address on multiple occasions. When you did not respond to certified correspondence, we flagged it as potentially misdirected. Your father also designated an alternate contact, his longtime business partner, Catherine Sterling, to hold the estate in trust pending your location and identity verification." I said, "Someone was intercepting my mail." He didn't look surprised. He leaned forward slightly and he said, "Can you tell me more?" I told him everything. Evelyn, Brandon, the gray hoodie, the certified packages, 2 years of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, "Miss Harmon, if what you're describing is accurate, what we are dealing with is mail fraud, estate interference, and potentially forgery if any correspondence was signed in your name without authorization." He held my gaze. He said, "That is a federal matter." And then he opened to another section of the folder, and he set one more document on the desk. He said, "There is one additional matter you need to know about." He said it the way doctors say, "There's one more thing we need to discuss." That particular tone. He said, 8 months ago, a petition was filed in the Summit County Probate Court. The petition was submitted by Linda Marie Caldwell. In it, she claimed that you, Mara Lee Harmon, had died and had therefore abandoned your interest in your father's estate. I went very still. "She filed a petition saying I was dead," I said. "She did," he said. "We flagged it immediately because we had prior contact information on file for you and no corresponding death record. We did not act on it. But if that petition had gone uncontested through the court, the estate would have become eligible for redistribution under the secondary beneficiary clause." I said, "Who is the secondary beneficiary?" James looked at me. He said, "Brandon Caldwell." The silence in that office was the loudest silence I have ever sat inside. My mother, my half-brother, filing paperwork to declare me legally dead, to take an inheritance that my father had spent the last years of his life making sure would reach me. I thought about Linda Caldwell in her floral dress, serving deviled eggs, telling me I was garbage. And I made a decision right there in James Whitfield's office. I said, "I want to proceed." He said, "All the way?" I said, "Every single step." I want to be honest with you about the weeks between walking out of James's office and doing anything with the information I had, because I know what it sounds like from the outside. It sounds like, once you have all the pieces, you just snap into motion, like clarity is the same thing as action. But that is not what happened. What happened is I went home to my studio apartment, the small one with the radiator that clanked all night and the view of the parking garage, and I sat in the middle of my floor and I cried. Not from sadness exactly, more from exhaustion. The deep, marrow-level exhaustion of having spent your entire life wondering if you were the problem. Wondering if the way your mother treated you was somehow your fault. Wondering if you were, in fact, what she said you were. The burden, the leech, the garbage. Because she had said it so many times, in so many different rooms, in so many different ways, for so many years, that it had become the wallpaper inside your head. I had built a whole inner voice out of her words. Every time I failed at something, her voice. Every time I felt insecure, her voice. Every time I thought about Thomas Harmon's estate and talked myself out of pursuing it, her voice. He didn't want you. You're not wanted. You have always been too much. And now I was sitting here with proof that every single word of that was a construction. A deliberate, financially motivated, coordinated lie. She had not been protecting me from Thomas. She had been protecting herself and Brandon from me finding out the truth. She had been blocking my father from my entire life. And when he died and left me something real, something significant, she had moved to make sure I would never see it. That is not a complicated woman who made a mistake. That is a calculated person who made a choice, over and over again, for my entire life. And once I sat with that long enough to really feel it, really let it land, I stood up. I washed my face. I called James Whitfield. And I said, "Let's move." This is the part I want you to pay close attention to. Everything I did from that point forward was completely, cleanly, thoroughly legal. Not technically legal. Actually legal. The kind of legal that comes with receipts. And I had receipts. I had Evelyn Harris, who had already written a formal statement about witnessing Brandon sign for certified mail addressed to me over a period of 22 months. I had security camera footage from the post office, which James's team obtained through the appropriate legal channels, showing Brandon on 6 separate documented occasions collecting packages addressed to Mara L. Harmon. I had the fraudulent probate petition Linda had filed, with her own signature on it. I had Thomas Harmon's complete estate documentation, the valid, unaltered, properly witnessed and notarized will, verified by multiple parties, including the firm that handled the original drafting. And then James introduced me to Catherine Sterling. Catherine Sterling was, without question, the most quietly powerful person I had ever sat across from in my life. She was the co-founder and chief executive of Sterling Harmon Real Estate Development, the company she had built alongside my father over the course of 18 years. She was 61 years old, impeccably dressed, silver hair cut close. She had the particular kind of stillness that belongs only to people who are absolutely certain of their own power and have nothing left to prove. When James introduced us in the conference room, me and the woman my father had trusted most in this world, she looked at me for a long, steady moment. She said, "You look exactly like him." I almost lost it right there. Almost. She reached across the table and she held my hand for 1 second. Then she sat back and she said, "Your father talked about you. Constantly. He never stopped trying to find a way in." "She blocked him," I said. "I know," Catherine said. "We both suspected it. But we didn't know to what extent until you came to us." She told me that Thomas had built structural protections into the estate specifically because he knew the process could get complicated. He had told Catherine, and she said this directly without softening it, that he did not trust Linda Caldwell. He had put explicit verification requirements in the estate so that no one could claim assets on my behalf without me physically present, with identity documents, in front of a proper legal proceeding. Linda and Brandon had hit that wall, and rather than stop, they had filed a petition claiming I was dead. Catherine folded her hands on the table. She looked at me. She said, "Mara, do you want to handle this quietly, or do you want to handle it completely?" I said, "What's the difference?" She said, "Quietly means you receive everything that belongs to you. The legal process handles the fraud matter separately, and your mother doesn't see what's coming until it's already done. Completely means you choose the moment, you choose when, and you choose the audience." I did not have to think about it for long. I thought about 30 people in a backyard. I thought about a paper cup of iced tea. I thought about, "You are garbage, Mara." I said, "Completely." Catherine smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a chess player's smile. She said, "I thought so. Here's what we did." James Whitfield filed a formal legal response to Linda's fraudulent probate petition, which immediately triggered a court investigation into the filing. His office also submitted Evelyn's statement and the post office footage to the postal inspector's office, which opened a separate federal inquiry into the mail interception. Catherine's legal team filed a civil complaint against both Linda Caldwell and Brandon Caldwell for tortious interference with an inheritance and estate fraud. None of this was public yet. None of it was noisy. All of it was moving through the appropriate systems quietly, precisely, like water finding its level. Meanwhile, James completed the identity verification process for the estate. He walked me through every document. He explained every holding, every account, the trust Thomas had set up years before his death. I will not give you numbers because this is a story, not a financial statement. But I will tell you this. When I walked out of James Whitfield's office after that final meeting, I sat in my car and I understood for the first time what it meant to have options. Real options, the kind that are not conditional on anyone's approval. Then I made a phone call. I told James, "The demand letters. I want them to go out on a specific Friday." He said, "What Friday?" I said, "My cousin Deja is turning 25 next month. My Aunt Rolanda is throwing a family dinner on a Sunday. I need the demand letters to hit on the Friday before that dinner." He understood immediately. He said, "I'll make sure of it." The weeks between Catherine's office and that Sunday were the most surreal of my life. On the outside, I was the same Mara I always appeared to be. I texted with Rolanda occasionally. I went to my new job every day, a position at a boutique real estate investment firm that I'd gotten through a referral from Catherine Sterling, who it turned out was connected to everyone who mattered in that world. I went to the gym, I bought groceries, I did laundry. I was a perfectly ordinary person on the surface. On the inside, I was watching every detail with the focused attention of someone who knows exactly what is coming and has already decided how it ends. James called me on the Friday to confirm. He said, "Both letters have been served. Brandon's was accepted at his apartment. Linda's was accepted at her residence on Maple Creek Drive." I said, "Were they home when it was served?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Good." I hung up the phone and I felt something unlock in my chest. I want to describe what was in those letters because I think you deserve to understand the full weight of what landed on Linda Caldwell's kitchen table that Friday afternoon. The demand letter outlined the civil complaint against her. It detailed the fraudulent probate petition she had filed. It outlined the evidence of mail interception, Evelyn's statement, the post office footage, the documented dates and package descriptions. It referenced the federal mail fraud inquiry that was now open as a separate and independent matter. It gave her a response window and instructed her to retain legal counsel. And it included, and this is the part that I think about the most, it included a line stating that the legal proceedings were being initiated by Mara Lee Harmon, verified and confirmed sole primary beneficiary of the Thomas Harmon estate, who was very much alive. Very much alive. I wish I could have seen her face in that moment. I genuinely do. But I had something better coming. Because the next evening, Saturday, I called Catherine. I said, "I think it's time for you to come meet my family." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was wondering when you'd ask." I said, "Can you do Sunday afternoon? My Aunt Rolanda's house, 3 blocks from Linda's." She said, "I'll clear my calendar. Do you want the full presentation?" I said, "Catherine, bring the car." There was a pause, a beat of quiet that I will keep with me forever. Then she said, "Oh, I like you, Mara. Your father would have too." And that single sentence, was the only time I cried through this entire thing. Sunday came the way the best days do, clean, warm, the kind of afternoon that makes the whole world look like it's been washed overnight and set out to dry. I drove to Rolanda's house just after noon, and the gathering was already full and loud when I arrived. Tables in the yard, the smell of food from the kitchen, kids running across the grass, Deja's friends from college filling the spaces between family members. Rolanda met me at the gate. She hugged me tight and held it for a moment longer than usual, and she said, "Baby, I'm so sorry about last time. I should have stood up for you. I should have said something." I said. Don't be sorry, Rolanda. Everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. She gave me a look I know well. That specific combination of concern and curiosity that Rolanda has had her whole life. I just smiled. Linda arrived at the party about 40 minutes after me. She came through the gate with her husband Dennis, gray, quiet, the kind of man who has learned to agree with everything Linda says because disagreement costs too much. And the moment she saw me standing near the drink table, her jaw went tight. Not shocked. More annoyed. More, of course she's here again. She said nothing to me. I said nothing to her. We moved through that backyard like two planets with different orbits, and I watched her settle into a chair near her sister and cousins and hold court the way she always did, talking just a little too loudly, laughing at her own punchlines, accepting compliments on the food she'd brought with the practiced grace of someone who has always assumed she was the main event. I kept my phone in my pocket. I talked to Deja. I ate some food. I watched the clock in my head. At 2:47 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. Text from Catherine. 12 minutes out. Confirm the address. I texted back. She's at my Aunt Rolanda's. 14 Birch Glen Court. 3 blocks from Linda's house. Come here. Catherine replied with one word. Better. I put my phone away, and I waited. At 3:01, I heard it before I saw it. The low, smooth, expensive hum of an engine slowing to a stop outside the house. People near the front yard drifted toward the fence. Someone said, "Who ordered a limo?" I heard Linda's voice cut through the crowd. "A limo? On this street? Somebody has the wrong address." She laughed. A couple of people laughed with her. Then the gate opened. Catherine Sterling walked through first. She was in a cream blazer and tailored slacks, and she moved through that gate the way she moved through every room, with the calm of someone who has already won whatever conversation hasn't started yet. Behind her came James Whitfield, dark suit, briefcase in hand. Behind James came 2 members of Catherine's legal team, both in business attire. The entire yard went quiet in a single wave. Linda was standing now, craning to see over people's heads, and I watched the exact moment she recognized James Whitfield. Because here's something I hadn't told you yet. James had been to Maple Creek Drive before, about 14 months ago, attempting to deliver a formal legal notice about Thomas's estate. Linda had opened the door, told him she had no information about my whereabouts, and closed it in his face. She had lied to his face at her own front door, and he had just walked into her family party. I saw the color leave her face. Not gradually, all at once, like a light going off behind her eyes. I walked forward to meet Catherine and James. I felt the eyes of 30 people tracking my path across that yard. Catherine took my hand when I reached her. She said, loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly, "Mara, it's good to see you." I turned to face the yard. I said, "Everyone, this is Catherine Sterling. She was my father's business partner. She's here because there are some things my family deserves to know," Linda said, and her voice had a strange, stretched quality to it now. "Mara, this is not the time or the place for—" "Ms. Caldwell," James Whitfield said, stepping forward, "I believe you received our correspondence on Friday." Silence. Absolute silence. Linda said, "That is not something we need to discuss here." "Maybe not," I said. "But I'd like to, because these people, my family, have heard your version of things for my entire life. Aunt Rolanda, Uncle Derek, Cousin Deja, they all deserve to hear mine." Deja moved to stand beside me. She was 25, bright-eyed, and she'd texted me 4 times over the past 2 weeks, asking questions I had answered carefully, without giving too much away. She stood beside me and she said very softly to Linda, "Grandma, what's going on?" Linda said, "Nothing, Deja. This is not your business." "It became everyone's business," I said, "when you filed papers in a court of law stating that I was dead." I heard someone gasp. Rolanda's voice. "What?" And I watched it move through the crowd, like a current. "She's lying," Linda said. Her voice was sharp, but I could hear the thinness behind it now, the way a surface sounds right before it cracks. James opened his briefcase. He produced a document. He said, "This is a certified copy of the petition filed by Linda Marie Caldwell in the Summit County Probate Court, dated 8 months ago. The petition claims that Mara Lee Harmon, her daughter, had passed away and had therefore forfeited her interest in the Thomas Harmon estate. He set it on the folding table, right next to the potato salad. Nobody touched the potato salad. "You told a court I was dead," I said. Linda's face did something complicated. It did not crumble. She was too controlled for that. But something shifted behind it, like a wall when the foundation moves. "I was trying to protect this family," she said. "Thomas Harmon was not a good man. That money, that estate, it would have brought nothing but trouble. I was protecting Mara. I was protecting all of you from—" "Did you tell Brandon to pick up my mail?" I asked. The yard went absolutely still. "Did you tell him to intercept certified packages addressed to me for almost 2 years? Did you coach him on how to sign for them?" "Mara, was he there when you filed the petition saying I was dead? Did he know?" "Stop it," she said. Her voice had dropped. "Stop doing this here. This is not the place. This is not appropriate. This is Deja's party." "You threw me out of this family's party," I said. 6 weeks ago, in front of these exact people. You called me garbage and walked away to serve deviled eggs. So forgive me if I'm not rushing to find a more appropriate moment." Rolanda said, "Linda." Just her name, low and flat. "Linda, is any of this true?" Linda said nothing. "Linda," Rolanda said again, and something in her voice had shifted into a register I had never heard from her before, something that was equal parts heartbreak and fury. "Did you file papers saying your daughter was dead?" And there it was. The moment that I had been moving toward, quietly, carefully, for months. My mother, Linda Caldwell, who told me I was garbage, who blocked my father from my entire life, who intercepted my legal mail for 2 years, who signed her name to a document calling me deceased so she could redirect what was mine, stood in the middle of her sister's backyard with 30 people watching. And she couldn't say no. She stood there, and she could not say no. Deja said very softly, "Oh my God." Someone else said Brandon's name somewhere across the yard, and I knew, from information James had relayed, that Brandon had not come to this party. He'd received his demand letter Friday afternoon. He had called Linda in a panic Friday night. She had told him, "Don't say a word to anyone. Don't go Sunday. Let me handle it." He hadn't come. He'd known something was coming, and he still hadn't warned any of them. Catherine stepped forward at that point. She had been standing still this entire time, watching with that measured, complete attention that I had come to recognize as her version of taking notes. She spoke in the careful, precise tone of someone who has sat in 1,000 rooms and left all of them with exactly what she came for. She said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I want to be clear about the current situation for everyone present. Mara Lee Harmon has been fully verified as the sole primary beneficiary of the Thomas Harmon estate. The legal transfer of assets to her is underway. The fraudulent probate petition you filed has been flagged by the court and is under review. There is a federal mail fraud inquiry currently open regarding the interception of her certified correspondence. And a civil complaint has been filed against both you and your son for tortious interference with an inheritance." She paused. She let every single word settle into that yard, like stones dropped into still water. "None of that," Catherine said, "can be undone." Linda sat down. She just sat down, in her lawn chair, like the bones in her legs had stopped cooperating. Someone was crying. I think it was one of the younger cousins who didn't even fully understand what they were hearing but understood. The way people always understand emotion before logic, that something enormous had just shifted. Rolanda pressed both hands over her mouth. Dennis, Linda's husband, gray and quiet Dennis, sat down slowly in his own chair and stared at the grass and said nothing. I want to tell you that in that moment I felt triumphant. I want to say I felt vindicated, electric, complete. But what I actually felt was clean. That is the only word that is accurate. Clean. Like something that had been sitting on my chest since I was 8 years old had been carefully lifted and set somewhere else, and I could finally breathe all the way down. I looked at my mother sitting in that chair with her eyes closed and her hands folded in her lap. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought, I am done. I am done trying to understand you. I am done trying to earn something you were never going to give. I am done building my sense of self around whether you see me as worthy of being alive. I am done. Catherine touched my arm. I nodded. I turned to Deja and I hugged her tight. I said quietly into her ear, "Happy birthday. I have a real gift coming. The wrapped one was just for show." She laughed, and then she cried. And then we were both laughing and crying at the same time, which is, I think, the most honest response to a day like that. I hugged Rolanda. She held my face in both her hands and she said, "I'm sorry, baby. I am so sorry it took this long. I am sorry I didn't see it." I said, "You see it now. That's what matters." I said goodbye to the people I loved. I walked out through the front gate. Catherine's driver was standing beside the limo. He opened the door. I stopped. I looked back through the fence, through the yard, at the stillness that had settled over a party that had been loud and warm 30 minutes ago. At my mother in her chair. At the document on the folding table. At 30 people who had watched Linda Caldwell call me garbage 6 weeks earlier, and who were now watching something entirely different. I got in the car. I'm not going to pretend the months that followed were simple. They were not. There were hearings, filings, depositions, legal processes I never want to navigate again. Linda retained an attorney. Brandon retained an attorney. Both of them. Together. Their attorneys looked at the evidence James had compiled, and they settled the civil complaint rather than let it proceed to trial. The settlement terms are confidential, and I intend to keep them that way. What I will say is that James was very, very good at his job. The federal mail fraud inquiry proceeded independently and is not something I participated in beyond providing my initial statement and documentation. My role in that matter was to show up, state my name, confirm my identity, hand the materials to the people who are trained and paid and legally empowered to handle it, and then step back. That is what I did. I also want to tell you about the apartment. Catherine introduced me to a contact in Columbus who had a property she thought might suit me, and I drove there one Tuesday morning and walked into the empty living room and stood in the light that was coming through windows that were enormous and old and beautiful. And I thought, this one. This is mine. Not borrowed, not provisional, not conditional on someone else's approval or anyone else's version of who I am. Mine. I have photographs of Thomas on the wall now. 3 of them. Catherine gave them to me from his office after I told her I had nothing. The one I look at most often is from when he was in his early 30s. He's standing in front of a building in Cleveland, one of his early projects, Catherine told me. And he is laughing at something happening just off camera. He looks young. He looks light. He looks like someone who believed the best was still coming. I look at that photograph sometimes and I let myself feel the grief of it, the years taken, the phone calls she blocked, the letters almost certainly intercepted long before the estate letters. The version of my life that could have existed if she had just let us be. If she had just let a father and his daughter find each other. I let myself feel it. And then I stop. Because here is the thing I have learned about this particular kind of grief. You can honor it without making a home inside it. You can look at your father laughing in front of a building in Cleveland and say, "I see you, Thomas. I am sorry we didn't get more time. I am going to do something worthy with what you left me." And then you can walk away from the window and make coffee and get on with your day. As for Linda Caldwell can live with what she did. That is not my job anymore. My job is to be Mara Lee Harmon, and I am just getting started. If you are out there right now listening to this and you know what it feels like to be told you are nothing by the person who is supposed to love you first and best, I want you to hear me. The people who tell you that you are garbage are almost always the people who are most afraid of what you will build without them. Linda Caldwell called me garbage in front of 30 people. She filed papers in a court of law saying I was dead. She spent 2 years working to make sure I would never see what my father left me. And when that black limo rolled up on a Sunday afternoon and that gate swung open, I was the most alive I had ever been in my entire life. Stay with your process. Stay with your truth. And remember this. The cleanest kind of justice is never loud. It just shows up, impeccably dressed, on a warm Sunday afternoon, and it doesn't even have to say a word.